Hi, everyone. To everyone just joining us, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box. We're going to give a few others a couple more minutes to join us, and then we'll get started soon. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now. Welcome everyone to our discussion today on tools and guidance for youth livelihoods and food security programs. If you haven't yet, please introduce yourself in the chat box. It's great to see already that we have a really international audience joining us. I'm seeing Uganda, Zimbabwe, and so forth. So please let us know where you're joining from and your agency and your title when you get a minute. You can also use that space to flag any technical troubles you might be having, and we'll make sure someone helps to get you sorted out. So my name is Kristen Lambert, and I'm the Program Director for SCALE, which is hosting this event, and I'm a member of Mercy Corps' Agriculture Systems technical team. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a brief snapshot of SCALE before we launch into the main discussion. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, SCALE is a learning award funded by USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance, or BHA. And we provide capacity strengthening, knowledge sharing, and research support for all of BHA's BHA-funded emergency and non-emergency food security programs, with a focus on agriculture, natural resource management, and off-farm and non-farm livelihoods activities. Which brings us to our discussion today. I'd encourage you all to check out the website that you see at the link there. And if you'd like to reach out to us for any specific requests, feel free to ping us at that email address below. We love to look for new opportunities to engage with and collaborate with the BHA community. Also, a quick reminder as you join us, if you could please mute yourself. You will have an opportunity to join the discussion later, but to avoid distractions, if you could go ahead and mute your mics as you join, we'd appreciate it. Next slide, please. For today's webinar, I'm joined by my colleagues Carrie Byrne, Ashley Ahrens, and Tara Nirona. And we'll start this webinar in a minute with a presentation from Tara about SCALE's recently published Youth Livelihoods Guidance document. After that, we'll split into 4 breakout rooms with the topics based on the interest that you expressed in the registration form. So hopefully the topics that you're seeing now on that slide look familiar to you. Before I pass over to Tara, I'd like for you to all select a breakout room. Hopefully in a minute, Suzanne, if you could put up, the poll should be appearing on your screen now with 4 options. After the presentation, you'll be put into a breakout room with the topic that you've discussed. that you've selected so that you can have a deeper discussion with some of your colleagues around that point. So I'll pause for a minute and please take a moment to go ahead and select the breakout room you'd like to join.
All of us are anxiously watching all of us presenters are anxiously watching to see who's going to be in our rooms or how many. Come, Emily, go, Emily.
All right, looks like we've just over half. Okay, nearly everyone's voted. So please take a quick second to select your choice if you haven't yet. And if you're having any trouble seeing or accessing that poll, just ping us in the chat box, or we'll be sure to get you in the right place after the presentation. All right, final call to select your breakout group. Okay, thanks all for weighing in on that, and we'll look forward to chatting with you soon shortly in those smaller group discussions. For now, Tara, I wanted to hand the mic over to you, and if you could discuss a little bit more of the resource and some of the engagement strategies in the document. Thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you, Kristen. I hope everyone can hear me. As Kristen mentioned, my name is Tara Nirona, and I've been working with the SCALE team on and off for the past few years on the Alternative Livelihoods work. I'm based in Portland, Oregon. One of the exercises that we undertook as SCALE 2 years ago was to do a survey to really understand what people were grappling with in so we spoke to chiefs of party, headquarters staff, technical advisors, field implementers, our BHA colleagues, just to understand what the thematic areas within off-farm and non-farm work people were dealing with, but also to understand, communication flows and how people like to receive information. What was not a surprise is that youth bubbled up as a big priority for many programs, but something that we found that I thought was quite interesting was on communication and knowledge sharing. We heard from so many folks that there's just too many resources and too many tools and too many manuals. And I remember hearing from one chief of party, we see all these great resources, but every time I open my email, there's another newsletter, another toolkit, and our field teams are so busy. It's very hard to navigate, 300-page documents to find out what's most relevant for us. So many people said, is there any way we could do kind of like a tip sheet or a cheat sheet to kind of guide us to what some of the existing resources are, what's been tested, what's been evidence-based, and just to help us really navigate that field of what's working and what's not. Because I know that all of you have very limited time and bandwidth. So really the evolution of this cheat sheet guide is to really hone in on some existing resources and direct you to relevant pieces for your program. Next slide, please. So I think it's always good to have a refresher on who we're talking about. So USA defines young people broadly between the ages of 10 to 29, but more specifically 15 to 24. Of course, local definitions are very important and you can adjust appropriately, but we really try to look specifically to that 15 to 24 range, and that's the USA definition. When we think about engaging young people, I think the default is, how do we engage young people in our programs? How do we get young people to be participants, etc. But I would really encourage everyone to think outside of the box and, beyond looking at young people as participants, thinking about how we can engage youth as also partners and staff. So in many of the countries where I'm sure you work, young people are, leading technology specialists, they're managing NGOs, they're some of the cutting edge entrepreneurs. And I think especially when we are designing programs, it's very easy to kind of forge partnerships with those agencies and organizations that we've worked with for a long time. But I'd really encourage everyone to really think outside of the box and think about how we can strategically partner with young people as we set up these programs and as part of our program design and as key partners. Also, I think it's really important to think about how we can partner with young people as staff. Many programs have youth technical advisors or youth community development specialists, and I think there's no one that knows more appropriately how to work with young people than a young person themselves. So think about how we can engage young people as key parts of our program and hire them on as staff. And I think that there's no one that probably understands the nuances of working with young people in the world of work in a particular context than a young person themselves. So again, think about young people not only as participants, but as partners and staff. This document covers, just a few of the approaches we think about when engaging young people. Some of the most common, particularly for USAID and BHA programs, are positive youth development, and that looks at the 4 domains for creating healthy, productive, and engaged youth. That's agency, assets, contribution, and the enabling environment. And these are all in the document itself. And Youth Power, which is a USAID platform, has many frameworks and guidance on how to engage young people within the positive youth development framework. We think about how to make markets work for youth, understanding the supply and demand for labor, specifically as it applies to young people, looking at the enabling environment. What are some of the, the norms that are impacting young people as they try to enter the world of work and stay in the world of work? And also it's important to think about safe, decent, and equitable work for young people. So particularly when we think about young people, we think about linking them to work that is both gender appropriate, age appropriate, making sure it's non-hazardous, understanding, safe working conditions, making sure that wage requirements are there, that young people are getting treated the same as their, adult colleagues, etc. So these are just 3 of the more common useful approaches to consider when you are designing and working with young people in your program. Next slide, please. So this is the actual document and cheat sheet, which I'm sure many of you have seen as part of the marketing materials for the event. It's also on the FSN website, which we will share again at the end of the conversation today. And it's always good to remember that even though we are putting forward some of these true and tried and tested resources, that there's no one size fits all guide. There's nothing that unfortunately can be taken right off the shelf and applied to your program. So make sure that you're setting aside some time and resources to adapt these tools for your context and for your specific interventions and for your specific youth population. Also remember that young people are a very diverse cohort. They're very vibrant within the group that you're working with. So make sure to understand both the diversity and intersectionality of young people. And I know that's something that USAID has been really focused on, in the past few years. And also take age transitions into consideration. Scale hosted a roundtable at Food for Peace a few years ago, and something that we talked about with a lot of our youth colleagues was that, a young person may start the program at age 15, but 5 years into a program is going to be 20. So think about those personal, social, and economic transitions that young people are facing within the span of your program and how the program might shift and adapt with them. And we're going to go to the next slide. And so here's how we'd like to use the guide itself. We've created this little pathway visual that you'll see, which focuses on young people as participants. And there's kind of 4 elements that we've sorted out. So there's pre-program youth engagement, which includes identifying youth for an assessment, hopefully an assessment of some sort, youth-led if it's appropriate, program design. Then there's interventions focused on the supply side of the labor market, things like skills, financial services. And then also the demand side of the labor market, linkages to jobs, enabling environment, and then also post-program and engagement. And these are just some sample frequently used interventions. These are not exhaustive, but we've just given some examples here. And keep in mind that you can work in any combination of these interventions. And so how we've set up the guide is for each one of these suggested interventions, we've shared some tools and links of resources that we feel will be most relevant to you in your programs. And then we've also shared some key questions. So for example, mentoring is one of the very common components that comes up. So on page 17 of the resource, we've shared the Micro Mentor platform, which connects, small businesses with mentors from around the world. And we've started you off with some key questions. So for example, what is the goal of the mentoring component? Is it social capital? Is it professional relationships? Is it building technical expertise? Things to really think through as you consider a mentoring component. Does the profile of the mentor match the profile and needs of the young person with regards to age, gender, area of expertise, and other matters of interest? Are you thinking thoughtfully about how we're matching young people with their mentors? And what are the expectations of the mentoring component? And are they clear to both the mentor and the mentee? Is there a mutual understanding of how that relationship is going to work, the frequency of engagement, what each is going to get out of that relationship? So for each of these components that you see here in this visual, we've put together just some key questions for you to consider, just to get you to start thinking about the component. And then we've shared key resources that you can use as just a starting point. And again, this guide is not exhaustive. Ideally, it would be updated frequently as more relevant resources and more updated resources come to the table. And I hope some of you see some of the resources that you've used in here, perhaps your agency resources as well. I want everyone to remember that there are, many existing platforms that we can use, such as Youth Power. I know Feed the Future has put together some really fantastic youth agri-systems design and implementation guides, which are also shared in the document. So there's a lot of knowledge that's already out there. And this document really hopes to help guide you in the direction of how to use some of that, and hopefully will save you some time as you're looking to engage with young people. Thank you. Look forward to some questions in the breakout rooms later. I think we're going to go over to you, Carrie.
Great, thanks, Tara. Obviously, lots of really good resources and guidance in the document. And in a few minutes, we're going to have a chance to kind of dive into the different things that we've learned, or things that are pieces of the document. My name is Carrie Byrne. Sorry, I should have said that. I'm Carrie Byrne. I'm the Livelihoods Advisor for Scale. Before we go to the breakout rooms and engage in that deeper discussion, which I think is really the core of this webinar, I wanted to acknowledge that a lot of you indicated upon the registration your interest in employment trends and aligning training with employment. And we have another webinar that's coming up. We've got a colleague that is working on some interesting pieces around employment that I think are really quite relevant. So Ashley, do you want to tell them a little bit more about what you're working on and the future webinar?
Yeah, well, thanks so much for the introduction. Thanks everyone, really happy to be here. I think it's clear from previous Scale research and from speaking to a large number of you, there's a really big interest in market systems development and systems change principles. And I think a lot of us in our agencies do within, let's say, agricultural programs, but a lot of thinking about how can we move that to youth employment, to off-farm and non-farm. But at the same time, those same kind of reports say there's often a lack of clarity and about exactly what does that mean. Sometimes people with different experiences, different views, and perhaps more challengingly, if that can be a word, is like seeing examples of that. We see examples in smallholder farming, but what does that look like when you get to peri-urban areas, when you leave farming? So based on that, I mean, that's kind of at Mercy Corps, that's my particular focus. I was brought in to bring MSD principles into the youth employment work. And so I was asked to write some definitional guidance on this. So I've been working on some guidance which really tries to define what an MSD approach is, a market systems development approach is to rural employment. And it looks at various things, so key principles, how that varies with now and the MSD approach, what it looks like from the life cycle, challenges, examples. So this is to let you know that's on its way. So the big news is that that should be released via Scale in the next couple of weeks, or at least not far off. And we're planning a webinar on that in end of August. So when people are back from their holidays and full of energy again. I mean, if you come to the trends session, we'll talk about it a bit there. But I really want to say, it's really early on thinking about bringing MSD to employment. So if I think this document is part of a conversation. If you want to reach out to me to start talking about this, great. And I really look forward to seeing all of your inputs into that and as we go forward.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks, Ashley. I think it's really interesting work, and it's really relevant to the conversation around youth employment today. So for those of you who aren't already in Ashley's breakout room, look out for that announcement, probably the end of August, as Ashley was saying. So now we're going to be put in our breakout rooms. If you were here to answer the poll at the beginning of the webinar, you'll automatically go to the breakout room that you chose at that time. If you didn't have a chance to pick a room, let's say you came just a minute or two late or couldn't decide, you'll just stay here and Suzanne will get you sorted out and you'll join our room quickly. If you feel like, oh no, I've got to change rooms, I really should have picked M&E because that is going to be Carrie and she's going to be awesome. Then it is fine to use the controls and just switch, come out of the breakout room, and Suzanne can help you get into your preferred breakout room. So just as a quick reminder, you can see it on the screen. We've got Kristen doing program design and working with youth as program partners. Tara and her group are going to be talking about engaging with youth as peer mentors, older youth. Ashley, as he said, will be talking about youth employment trends and engaging with employment issues. And myself, I'll be working on youth as researchers and M&E. So we're going to head off now. When you come back, we're going to be looking for one or two kind of insights. We won't have a lot of time for breakout discussion, we'll have 20 minutes for breakout discussion. We won't have a lot of time for feedback, but we do want to hear the kind of one or two points. So make sure to have a deep and lively discussion and really start to use this guidance document, because that's what these conversations are for, is to kind of dig into the subject matter a little bit more. Right, Suzanne, take us away. Suzanne, let me know when everyone's back and we'll maybe go to the wrap up. It looks like I've got all the presenters back. Do we have all of the participants back?
It seems like we almost do. Yeah.
Great. I think the numbers have stabilized there. Kristen, do you want to go ahead and tell us just one or two of the more interesting points that came up in your discussion?
Yeah, thanks, Carrie, and thanks so much to the Group 1 participants. I had a feeling we could have kept going on for quite some time. So group one was program design, and we heard from a number of the participants in the group that were really emphasizing the importance of engaging youth participation from those early phases, because as some of these folks were saying that we have in the room, we really can't assume what youth will want, and that this is really important to leading to greater impacts of our implementation. I think some things that were highlighted in terms of program examples were particularly around engaging youth in agriculture-related activities, and that a common thread was that youth feedback to those activities was often ensuring that the ag activities are also linked to off-farm interests and the ability to create quicker income returns, as opposed to agricultural production, which might take a longer time. So that's kind of impacted how partners are thinking about shaping up their programs. And then lastly, we just talked a bit about the diversity of youth, that this is not a homogenous group, and that from those early phases of program design, you have to talk who specifically are you talking about when you talk about youth, I think as Tara said earlier, and tailoring the activities to those specific needs and desires. So
Great.
quick wrap up from us. Thanks, Carrie.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Tara, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you to everyone who participated in our group on peer mentoring and peer leaders. We had some great examples from Nigeria, Uganda, and Somalia. Some of the points that we talked about were why it's really important to match young people with other people who kind of have shared their experiences. For example, if we're thinking about a young female entrepreneur, perhaps connecting her to another young woman in the community who successfully started a business, so that exposure about the possibilities is there, but also so they can share about their particular experiences and perhaps the nuances of navigating that environment. Someone also shared a really interesting experience about continuing to work with young people after they've graduated from a specific component of the program. So in one program, there was an initial cohort of youth that went through a technical training. And at the end of that, they were continued to be engaged to be mentors to the second cohort. So they could kind of share their experiences about what they did with the skills they've learned, how they were using them in the community and in the workforce. And then we had some great ideas shared as well. Apio from Uganda shared that, she's looking at starting perhaps small group businesses or a small business forum where young people can come together in the community to share their experiences about working and navigating kind of the entrepreneurship landscape and kind of sharing experiences there. I think what was clear is there are not enough resources when it comes to mentoring, so we're going to keep our eyes on that. And if people come up with links or resources, please share them with the Scale community, and hopefully we can continue to share them with you.
Great. Thanks, Tara. It sounds like a great discussion. I wish I could have been in two places at once. Ashley, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, we had a really great discussion. So thanks everyone for sharing. I think we covered a fair amount of ground looking at key, labor system dynamics around kind of rethinking education and its relevance to the private sector, kind of competition within entrepreneurship, I think gender norms. But I think the one where we probably landed the most, and maybe we haven't asked, is around technology and rural areas. So we looked at some examples around how to use technology to support jobs in urban areas. But I think a couple of us, myself and a couple others, felt that there's a bit of a gap around thinking about technology and jobs in rural areas. Often assumptions come in about kind of internet viability, about handsets, about digital skills that maybe aren't problematic in such an urban areas, but where we work. And I think there's a knowledge gap, around that area that, I think we'd love if Scale could help, or, something for the future to look into tech, jobs, and rural areas.
Great. Lots of things to think about there. Thanks, Ashley. And thanks to that group. So group 4 was small but mighty and very creative. Lucy started out by telling us about some of the action reflections approach that they use to create a baseline. And so there was a lot of discussion around kind of what are some of the more creative ways that you can engage youth. And we sort of got on this discussion about gamification. So is there a way to take something that can feel intimidating or a little bit boring with regards, monitoring and evaluation is not make everyone think, oh yeah, wow. And so we were starting to play with this idea of could you make it entertaining and still get really viable data out of it? And Lucy was telling us about the action reflection approach, which is sort of like a better version of a focus group, right? In that it creates a baseline that a focus group might do, but it does it in this really kind of creative space. And we also got an example from Mohammed, who was talking about the mapping approaches that they use in their ABCD approach. Probably some of you know about that even more than I do. And it was a really creative way of thinking. And I think it's great because youth, in many ways, that would appeal to youth much more, to be more proactively engaged in that process of gathering information. And then there's a resource I really want to highlight. If you are in that creative space with M&E, I talked about the Youth Powers little brief on researchers, youth as researchers, because I think that fits nicely with that gamification idea, or how do we make it a more lively and real experience so that youth voice comes out in our program design? Over to you, Kristen, but also that there's really data that is relevant, and that it gives youth kind of an opportunity to almost get some professional experience by the act of being a researcher on a program. That particular resource just kind of flipped my mind on like, oh yeah, why don't we do this more? If we're doing youth programs, why don't we have youth as researchers? So that was the nature of the conversation in our space. Great. I think that's our wrap up and our webinar for today. Kristen, is there anything that I missed or forgot, or you want to reiterate for the group?
No, I think the one thing that I would say is just to encourage everyone to really dive deeper. Hopefully we whetted your appetite, but encourage everyone to dive deeper into this resource document. We were only able to focus on a couple bits of it in our breakout discussions, but there's a lot more rich resources and guidance in it. I'd also say that, Tara, we had discussed this as a bit of a living document, understanding that we might not capture everything, and that more great resources are coming out. So as you look through it, if you see something that you think would really enhance this resource, please send it our way. We're very open to incorporating additional resources. And then otherwise, you've got some of our key links in our website and our email address up here. So I would just encourage folks to both check out the resources on there. There's a load of stuff around youth livelihoods and livelihoods in general, and also to feel free to reach out to us for additional guidance or support. All right, back to you.
I was going to say, before we go, we do want to make sure that we put the resource itself in the chat again. I can see some people are asking for it. There we go. Oh, I think I may have sent it just to one person, but I'll get it to everyone in just a second here. There we go. All right, great. And Suzanne is reminding me, before you go, it would be great to have you fill out the quick survey. I'm really sorry we didn't have more time to talk in the breakout rooms. I can hear from each of the presenters that there was a lot of really rich discussion going on. I know I myself was tempted to extend the breakout room just a little bit and not come back on time, but I was responsible instead. Great, thank you everyone. Thanks for your time today.